Hey, I'm Meg Riley. So excited to be back with another episode of The VUU. I am here at the UUA headquarters today in Boston, Massachusetts, which is also the Church of the Larger Fellowship headquarters. I'm in a phone booth. That's this odd little room I'm in. How about you, Joanna? Where are you today?
I am here in my study at the church in Austin, Texas.
And Aisha?
Hi, I'm Aisha Hauser, and I'm in my den in Seattle, Washington.
That's great. Kind of faded out. You can sort of dimly see his face. Slim Moon has taken over technology this year. Bob LaValle has moved on, and we miss him and appreciate everything that he did for us. And we're grateful that Slim, you want to say hey to people? Tell them where you are.
Hi, everybody. I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad everybody's here.
He's in Vancouver, Washington. And we're really excited today to have as our special guest Artemis Joukowsky. Artemis Joukowsky, who has done many things in his life, but most recently has worked with Ken Burns to create the movie Defying the Nazis, the Sharp's War, about his grandparents, Martha and Waitstill Sharp. So we're really excited, Artemis, to have you with us and to tell us. I mean, it's been at the White House, it's been at the Holocaust Museum, it's been at the UN. Tell us about what's going on with this movie, and we're going to have lots of questions for you, as I'm sure the folks viewing will as well. But tell us, we'll just start with this. How did you start making a movie?
Well, it all started when I was in the 9th grade, and I was given an assignment by my 9th grade history teacher to interview someone of moral courage. And I came home and I said to my mom, who should I speak to? And she said, well, call your grandmother. She did some cool things during World War II. And little did I know, I would find out my grandmother was basically outwitting the Nazis, saving lives, falsifying documents, really acting as a spy on behalf of Social Democrats, Unitarians, Jews, and others who would be persecuted.
So no one had ever mentioned this to you about your grandmother?
No, no one had ever mentioned it, and my grandmother really wasn't wanting to talk about it. I think part of it was that World War II generation didn't want to celebrate their achievements when they had lost so much. My grandparents felt, I think, very sad that they could not help more people, and I think they really didn't want to speak about it because it brought up such bad memories. It was a member of my grandfather's church many years later in Davenport, Iowa, who came up to me and said, you know, I was in Waitstill's church for 15 years and he never mentioned his work in Europe once. And so that kind of gives you an idea of what we've been doing in reconstructing this story since that time, finding their archives, finding the people they rescued, interviewing them, many of them before they passed away. Unfortunately, given the age of many of these people, we've lost about half the interviewees. But together with a group of amazing filmmakers that includes Ken Burns as my co-director, we have put together an emotional film, a personal film, but that also sets in the context of World War II and the larger historical troubles of that period, and explains in many ways what the Sharps did and why they did what they did. Although, you know, I just showed the film last night to a wonderful group of Unitarians, and the conversations and the questions and kind of why did this happen and why did that happen, like anything in history, once you share a story, people want to know more, you know, and that's what's really exciting about this story is that we've shared the story in such a personal way that I think viewers want to understand more of the personal part. It is a love story. The film is a love story. It's a story of intrigue. It's an Alan First type novel where you're kind of under the nose of the Gestapo. But it's ultimately a love story not just between Martha and Waitstill, but Martha and Waitstill and how they felt about the world and how they loved all of humanity and how their actions were very much about not just loving their community or their family or their home turf. They were looking at what was going on in Europe and really wanting to challenge the fascist tendencies that were creeping up in Europe at that time.
So you've been at work on this for years. I know that you really didn't just waltz in and say, hey, Ken, how about we do this? And there it went. I mean, tell us how you did such a huge thing, this huge memorial that you've done.
Well, the first thing, that assignment in 9th grade, first of all, was the only A I ever got in high school. So it was a very proud moment for me. I'd never done well academically, but something touched my heart about my grandmother, and I wanted to know more about her and what motivated her. And so that conversation went on for about 20 years. And I always imagined a film or a book, and literally before they passed, I promised each of them that I would publish their own stories for the world to see. So I feel very much that in publishing our book with Beacon Press, I'm kind of completing that promise that I made to them. But the thing that's so exciting to me is how many people have identified with this story as their own. You know, almost all the people we're working with, both at PBS or in the media, are, you know, always introduce themselves as saying, you know, my family was also affected by World War II, or my family was, you know, in the Holocaust, or, you know, so this is a story that's not just about Martha and Waitstill. This is a story that inspires a whole generation of people to understand both what happened during that period, but more importantly, what is the implications today. You know, like how this film is inspiring people today to talk about refugees, to talk about the whole notion of the other. You know, what is the other? And really, for me, it's a ministry of sharing a sense of that we are a humanist community, that our society will only benefit when we understand the underlying humanism of each of us, and that tolerance is like the first step, or stopping hate is the first step. But really what the Sharps show us is that when you reach across to others, when you come to their aid when they've asked for your aid, you know, it's amazing what can happen in those circumstances. And even though the Sharps did not rescue as many people as they hoped, they literally helped hundreds of people escape, which is simply amazing to me as a grandson. And I think it challenges me to say, what can I do? You know, as a Unitarian Universalist, what can I do? I can't be Martha and Waitstill Sharp. Not many people can leave their children, go to a foreign place, save other children.
Why don't you, Artemis, why don't you share exactly what they did, what, you know, when they left, how they did that? Yeah, just share a little bit of their story so that people who aren't familiar with them know it.
Absolutely. Well, the Unitarian Church in Boston was outraged by what was happening in Prague. Their sister church, Unitaria, said, don't send us money, send us Americans. We need Americans to come here and help us because the Nazis are infiltrating our communities, and the only thing that the Nazis are afraid of are Americans. And so the Unitarian leadership, very much wanting to create a service entity like the American Friends Service Committee of the Quakers, invited a husband and a wife, a minister and his wife, to leave their parish and go to Europe and help their sister church in Prague. And of course, most ministers felt afraid of the war coming, or losing their jobs, or the impact in other areas of their lives, so they said no. And ironically and so magically, you know, they were the 18th choice. You know, and the number 18 in Judaism is the most important number. It means high, or life. So that's also an incredible irony. Anyway, they accept the invitation. The Unitarian community in Wellesley Hills and in Boston move into their home, take care of my mother, who was 2, and my uncle. And this is a very special story of the family called the Stebbinses. And they're very important members of the Unitarian community in this period of time. He was the publisher of Beacon Press at the time, Livingston Stebbins. And so anyway, they take care of my mother and uncle. My mother and uncle go to England first, and they meet with the Unitarians and Quakers in England and learn that they're going to have to know spycraft, that the Nazis will be spying on them. And I think my grandmother realizes, oh my God, this is really like more dangerous than we thought. They arrive on Prague into Wilson Station in February 26th and realize that the entire country is in chaos and that people on the trains are literally waiting to get out as they are coming in. And I think on their train there were maybe 20 people, 30 people, but the trains leaving Prague were just, you know, packed with social democrats, largely men who were trying to escape, with women and children on the platforms crying, you know, saying goodbye. And Waitstill looks at Norbert Čapek, this amazing Czech minister, and says, you know, I've arrived to a nation in crisis, and you know, we've got to get to work. So right away, the Sharps start helping in ways that they can. They've really been given a mandate to help with refugees. But when the Nazis invade March 15th, the Ides of March, 1939, everything changes. And they decide, after lots of discussion with the ambassador, with the underground, that they will stay, and they will now change their work from refugee support to rescue. And they start getting people out as much as they can, and they do that by laundering money. They take people over mountains, they buy people's plane tickets, they do whatever they can. There's no single method. But one thing you do learn, in spite of having to evade the Gestapo, so you have to physically be moving around, is you also had to go through a tremendous amount of bureaucracy to get someone out. You know, rescue is a bureaucratic process, really. And so one of the most beautiful things that happened when I started this film was I discovered all my grandmother's original documents of who she had rescued. So that became the basis in which we did our research. We found, you know, these people that my grandparents basically rescued. So they were there from February until August, helping as much as they could, money laundering, taking people out, and then there was an arrest warrant for them. And being a good mom and dad, they realized, we got to get home. This is serious. We might get killed. And they left. And they get on to the Queen Mary and sail home. And on that sail home, England declares war against Germany, and World War II officially begins. This is September 3rd, 1939. And by the time they get home, almost 2 weeks later, you know, they are just amazed that most Americans are more concerned about who's going to win the World Series than why this war has just been declared. And what you really get a sense in this story is the isolationism that has carried from the Depression is still very much an American phenomena, and FDR literally couldn't do anything to engage American public. And it wasn't until Pearl Harbor, of course, that the United States decided we have to fight these people. My grandparents were passionate pacifists, but at the same time they wanted to engage Hitler. They felt that the evil of Hitler could not be negotiated through agreements, and that he really needed to be stopped militarily. And on the second trip to Prague, to southern France, my grandfather actually declares war on Germany from the pulpit. Imagine in the Unitarian community, you know, a Unitarian minister declaring war on anybody, even using the word war. But here he is in 1940 declaring war on Germany. And his Unitarian brothers and sisters are not that happy about it. They're not happy that Martha's leaving her children. They don't think that's appropriate. Many people felt that even the invitation from the UUA was a little bit inappropriate. Like, how could you imagine that a mother and a father would want to leave their parish and go to, I mean, like the whole setup of the invitation was, you know, a little bit ambitious and maybe too dangerous for a couple to do. But luckily, Martha and Waitstill used their wits and learned the ways of the underground, learned the ways to avoid the Nazis. And then on their second trip, when they went back again in June of 1940, this time it was really a command from President Frederick Elliott, where he said, you know, we're losing too many people. I know you really need to be with your children, but I'm instructing you to go back now because we are losing too many people that we love and that we know that are part of our community.
And so did people start supporting them generally in the UU, the Unitarian community at that point?
Oh, yes. Oh, for every Martha and Waitstill Sharp, there was an enormous amount of support for them on the ground. But remember, they were in Boston, you know, or England. They weren't in Prague with them. But of course, they were working with the Unitarian community in Prague. So that was their whole context of using that Unitarian community as their underground kind of base of operations. And you also see the Quakers very involved in that as well. They're on the ground with them. And then there's a whole social democratic rebellion in the Prague, in the Czech Republic, which goes on throughout the whole war. You know, the famous story of the murder of the Nazi official in Prague in 1942. You know, that rebellion, that underground, stayed alive until the end of the war. And the Sharps were a part of that underground. It was extensive, you know. And one of the most fun parts of this story is in uncovering all those connections that the Sharps had with the Quakers, with Heisem, with the social democratic groups, all these institutions who were devoted to preserving democracy.
Wow. There's so much about this that is so fascinating. And you have this, you know, you're not just the filmmaker here, you're their grandson. Were there, when they would talk to you about this, were there lessons that they would emphasize to you, you know, beyond the narrative?
Absolutely. My grandmother, you know, the way I got to really know my grandmother after I did this assignment was I was diagnosed with a neuromuscular disease called spinal muscular atrophy. And for most people, die of this disease. I have a very mild form of it, thank goodness. But at that time, when I was 14, I thought I was going to die. And my grandmother came into my hospital room and said, you know what? You're not going to feel sorry for yourself. We're going to go help other people. Because her view was, I could just sit in my hospital room and feel bad about myself, or I could go help other people, and then I would feel good about myself. And it was a very simple psychology, you know. It's the kind of the basis of altruism that we now are studying in a psychological sense based on the Sharps. But the general notion is that when you love others and your love is in action, you're there helping, you're teaching, you know. So we would go to the Boys and Girls Club and I would teach math, you know, and I loved teaching math, and it helped these kids, and suddenly I wasn't focused on my problems. You know, I was focused on their challenges or whatever their concerns were. And my grandmother was very much about putting your heart on the line, living your, you know, your intelligence is your intuition, your brain, of course, but really going with your heart as, you know, the decision-making process for anything you did. She would often ask, you know, what are you going to do that's important in your life? And at the end of the film, you're going to be treated, when you all see the film, you know, we show her. We actually show Martha making that appeal to you, and you can just see how powerful she was. Later in her life, when I got to know her, you know, we would go to these fundraisers for Hadassah, and she would go up to beautiful women like the three of you and say, you know, that necklace you're wearing, that could save a life. And literally, these women would be undressing, giving her jewelry, and say, okay, save these people. You know, that was the kind of intense, passionate fundraiser, largely for children. I think Martha, in the end, really became devoted to children because she viewed children as the biggest victims of these wars, and wanted for the children she met to help as many as she could. And for Waitstill, it was much more about saving these important intellectuals and setting up the logistical structure for how people would be rescued, which is what the Unitarians did after the Sharps left the second time. What is amazing about the Sharps and the Unitarians and what happened with the Service Committee, and people don't know this history, is that the Unitarians stayed on throughout the entire war, even after the Sharps left on their second trip, and maintained an office and provided health care into the camps, into the internment camps like in Burns, and really established the first medical MASH technology to serve people who were living in very tight quarters. So it's an amazing story that is not told, and it's largely because Unitarians in general, and this is a general statement I would make, not not particular, is that we're so modest in our faith and our belief in humanity, and we don't see ourselves as, you know, arrogant leaders. We don't tell our own stories. We don't tell these amazing stories about what we've done. You know, we have so many Unitarians who have done so many things, and even in other Ken Burns films, like he celebrates the women's suffrage movement, they never really focus on their Unitarianism. In this film, we really get a chance, because of me as the filmmaker, to explain their faith, and I explain their faith with Jack Mendelson and Bill Schultz, who are two of the great legends of the Unitarian community in terms of articulating the sense of human justice, dignity, tolerance, and what Unitarianism means, not just as a faith, but really as America's values. If you look at what all Americans love about America, whether it's democracy, whether it's tolerance, whether it's living together in communities, Unitarianism is really, you know, what America in its best moments stands for. And I think we need to claim America as our best success. Because, you know, at the founding of our institution of government is a Unitarian bias. Even though they didn't say all men, women, children, dogs, and cats, and the trees are all created equal, and they all deserve to live together in harmony. That would have been the only thing I would have recommended to Jefferson, is that women and people of color and the earth is included in the pursuit of happiness. But anyway, that's you know, that's their general story. You know, the beautiful thing is you can watch 1 minute of this film and be inspired. PBS is putting clips up, and you can go to the PBS site, also the UUA site.
We'll be putting the websites up at the CLF Facebook group, as well as the Beacon book that Artemis referenced. And I encourage people to look at that, as well as the curriculum that Meadville Lombard Seminary has developed for people to use while watching the film or after. Aisha, were you trying to say something?
Yeah, I had a few thoughts actually as you were talking, but one question I had for you, Artemis, is how did the relationship with your grandmother affect or influence the choices you made in your life and your career? And I'm just curious if you're a member of a Unitarian church now.
Well, I first of all, am a member of the Church of the Larger Fellowship, which I'm very proud to be a member of. I think it's a major innovation of including a worldwide community virtually. I think it's really, in some ways, every church, whether they're a building or not, will somehow need to bring people together the way you have, Meg, and your team is incredible. And this whole what you are doing for Unitarianism is also what you're doing for the world, is bringing people together to have these conversations in this manner. My grandmother was passionate about saving lives, and she would do anything to save a life. I think, quite frankly, she would literally do anything, and I'm not going to say anything more about that. You can just use your imagination of what that might mean. She was a very beautiful woman. She definitely dressed the part to kind of get the attention she needed. She was the one that always interacted with the commandants and the Nazis, not my grandfather. My grandfather would have had a fist fight if he had to deal with these people. She was the smooth talker. She got the arrogance of the male ego. She understood patriarchy. You know, she got that these animals of men needed to be soothed in a certain way and understood and listened to. But she kind of did what she needed to do and asked for permission later. You know, she was kind of that kind of person. And she, saw me struggling with my disease, and she said, you can invent any life you want. Don't be limited by any ideas of your wheelchair or your weakness. Life is an oyster, and you enjoy it, and you make it your own. And, I'm very grateful to my grandmother that I have invented a life like that, and I'm not limited by my disabilities. And in fact, I see my disabilities very much as a gift of life, as a teacher of life. And she was the one that taught me those values.
Artemis, if Martha was alive now, what do you think she'd be working on? Probably everything, but what do you think?
I think she'd be in Lesbos. I think she would be in Lesbos. I think she would be doing asylum cases. I think she would be helping true enemies of Assad or the Russians, of people who literally would have been killed if they were returned. I think she would be at this UN conference next week with Obama at the UN talking about refugees. There's 65 million refugees, so she would have been also looking at the big picture. I'll give you an example of my grandmother. Not only does she rescue life, not only does she take care of people, but in 1939 goes to the governor of Alaska and says, you are asking for people to come here. I have about 6 million people I could bring here. And they will build hospitals and schools, and they are the most remarkable people. And there are not many of these people here now, but you'll love them. And, they said no. But imagine if the governor had said yes. Imagine if the State Department said yes, and all these Jews could have come before this slaughter began. Because at the Avion conference in 1938, Germany went to the world and said, take these people, we don't want them. And Martha took it seriously. She said, you know what, we have to do something now. So imagine she had the foresight and the vision to not just help individual people, but the chutzpah to go to her own government and say, you have to do more. And literally, that was, I think, her greatest struggle, is that she felt her own government had become immoral, that they had become focused on keeping people out for their quote-unquote ethnic background. And she was outraged. This was not the democracy she loved, and appealed to people like Eleanor Roosevelt. And we know that Eleanor Roosevelt and my grandmother corresponded. We know that they supported each other. The other piece of this, imagine this, 1940, she goes to California and is the first person to inspect the internment camps and demands that they be shut down, and says this is un-American to have Japanese people interned in camps. I mean, this is like a crazy thing. Actually, it was 1940, I'm sorry, that she went. But the point is, imagine, for example, if all the Germans had been interned, Eisenhower would have been in the camp, not leading, the United States Army. So that was her argument, is how racist can we be in the face of this racism in Europe? What are we doing? Who are us as Americans? And that's why Ken Burns picked this film, is that he loved the American story here. The America and the Holocaust. What did we know when? Why didn't we do more? Why did we turn the St. Louis away? What was our fear, ultimately? Why did we not see this as a major opportunity to help these people? And you look at Germany today, I mean, they're very nervous about having so many people, but quite frankly, it's going to make Germany a greater and stronger country to have this amazing group of immigrants come in at this time, because a generation from now, they will be, loyal members of that community. So that's what I think Martha would advocate for.
It's such an interesting time for this movie to be coming out, when one of our presidential candidates feels very free to otherize huge populations, both internationally and domestically. And
Right.
I'm curious what impact you think this movie might have in terms of people making those kinds of connections, seeing what's going on. I just saw a survey that 50% of Donald Trump supporters in Iowa think the Japanese internment camps were a good idea, which is way, like, double what even Paul Ryan's supporters think. So there's this ugliness being unleashed, whether whoever wins the election.
It's true, and it's hard to explain only. Yeah, no, sorry for interrupting. I think, first of all, the most exciting part to me is my partnership with about 50 institutions, including the UUA, the UUSC, Meadville Lombard, the UN office, the UU UN office, Shelter Rock. I mean, we probably have 400 partnerships with different churches to show the film. Our initial release of this film many years ago was actually a Yom HaShoah celebration from the Unitarian community. So the Unitarian actually initiated an interfaith screening of the film in synagogues and churches to celebrate Yom HaShoah. So inherently an interfaith event. We had all the 450 churches involved in that. So that was 4 years ago. Those churches were all ready to broadcast and show the film in their churches. So the Unitarians, first of all, have been amazing, you know. And I want to acknowledge Peter Morales, and I want to acknowledge Carrie McDonald and you, Meg, you know, for seeing the film is connected to the telling of the story of what UUs are all about. The most exciting partner is the White House. We just had a meeting at the White House. We met with senior administration officials who are dealing with the refugee crisis today. Incredibly talented State Department and White House officials. They just announced yesterday, that they're going to bring in 25,000 more, which is what we were asking them to do. And they have done that, and they've done it, of course, not because we said to do it, but they had their own volition as well. But our hope is that this film humanizes the refugee crisis today. That in looking in the eyes of these children and these people who were rescued, you know, you just imagine maybe a different color skin, and that's it, you know. And think about how superficial that is in general. That the color of someone's skin would matter what their story is as a human being. But I think Martha and Waitstill feel that people should go out and help each other. And what Ken Burns said after his Stanford speech is, you know, why doesn't every college student hide a Syrian in their bedroom for the year, and we can solve the problem right there? You know, that's the way Martha and Waitstill thought. They didn't think, you know, we need a big UN conference, although that would be helpful. They were more interested in what individuals could do in their communities. And of course, you know, if the U.S. government would make a major pledge in this manner, you know, I think that would, of course, help individuals. I myself am waiting to host 5 Syrian girls in my home, and it's taken a year through Catholic Charities to actually get the paperwork finished because, you know, our governor Baker does not want these Syrians in the state of Massachusetts in spite of a federal order from Obama. So, you know, this battle goes on. The same battles that we had, you know, with Breckinridge Long in the State Department, who ordered his consular officials around the world to delay the application of Jewish European immigrants on purpose so they couldn't get in, and making the visa process and the application process impossible to really fill out, to just make it impossible for people to get in. And literally, that policy of denying even the application, probably killed 1 million people. Think about that. Like, what arrogance as a policyholder, no matter what your beliefs are, to literally have those policies murder 1 million people. And I think one of the great initiations after this film is a program that we're doing with the Holocaust Museum that will be a very in-depth 3-year look at this issue of America and the Holocaust. Why did America not respond? Why didn't the St. Louis be allowed to dock and at least hold those people in some internment camp in America so they would be safe? Why didn't we do more to bomb the railroad tracks? You know, people argue, well, you know, we had military targets to go after. Well, the heck with the military targets. If you know millions of people are being slaughtered in these camps, you go bomb those camps. You know, I mean, that's the thing. This was a moral war. The war to fight Hitler was a moral war to fight evil, right? And evil in our view is not, you know, come from God. We are evil and we are good. You know, humans are that. But then not to actually go after the evilness and stop the slaughter of the Jews, you know, to me was a major, major mistake of American history, and something I feel, you know, almost deserves an apology from the State Department for doing everything it could to stop, you know, people who were going to be killed to come to this country. So I think that, sorry.
No, it's okay. I have a question actually about your mother, who so it sounded like the first time she even mentioned, she said your grandmother did cool things in World War II. After you found out the extent of those cool things, did you go back to mom and ask her what it was like for her? Does she have memories of her parents being missing for long periods of time?
Yeah, you know, my mom and I are very, very close, and I would never have done this project without not only her blessing, but her excitement for me. I think there were times when my grandmother died where she really didn't want to be part of, you know, the details of their past, and then there are times when, you know, now, for example, she's very excited and proud and a part of the whole conversation. My mom, I think, was left behind as a 2-year-old child on the first trip, cared for by other people who were lovely but weren't their mom and dad. And then when my grandparents went the second time, and the second trip was much longer than they originally thought. I mean, their second trip was really to establish a full-time office, so they could come, so others could come out there. It took much longer, and I think there really was a cost in their relationship. And we say that at the end of the film, that one of the regrets of my grandmother was that she wasn't more involved in her children's life at a critical time. You know, one of the reasons I show that in this film, I share the story of their divorce, I share the story of the abandonment, is to show there is sacrifice. And I didn't want to just make a Pollyanna story of my grandparents and show them only in their heroic moments. But just like any Unitarian and just like any human, you know, they put on one pair of pants, one leg at a time. You know, they made mistakes. They could have done more, I think, for their children. I think their children suffered from their work. So, you know, as much as we celebrate the Sharps, we also have to remember how human they were.
Well, and I think this is a question that so many activists are struggling with right now. I've heard some people talking about the question now isn't what will you sacrifice, but how much of your loved ones are you willing, to sacrifice?
Right, right. And you know, you see this in the story of Martin Luther King and Gandhi and so many great leaders struggle in parts of their lives, largely because we make people into heroes and then we assume that means perfection. And I think we need to have a Unitarian view of heroes, which is not, that heroes aren't made in the comic books. Heroes are people who make everyday choices and make moral choices and make mistakes, because you can't be right about every moral decision. You're going to make mistakes about people. You're going to support someone who really wasn't a refugee, more of a spy or whatever have you. And that was part of the reality of what they were dealing with. One of the most interesting things about this whole story about my grandmother and grandfather was their love affair during this time, and that was a fun thing to learn. Here I am, a grandson, learning about my grandparents who are now divorced and remarried other people. The other people they're married to don't want to hear their stories with their former husband or wife. And so I'm putting it together, learning how much they loved each other. And one of the moments, and you three lovely ladies can appreciate this, my grandmother writes to my grandfather, this passionate love story, and says, "I have been reading Lady Chatterley's Lover, and I should like to discuss this with you when I see you next. And the congregation would be aghast if they knew I was reading this book." So
racy!
And of course, that's the only moment in the film where everyone bursts out to laughter, but only if you're over the age of, let's say 30. No offense to anyone younger, but you have to have a certain kind of appreciation for D.H. Lawrence and kind of that history of his writing. They loved each other, and then when they fell out of love, it was a very painful thing for everybody. And one of the beautiful things for me as a filmmaker and a grandson is I'm cutting this film at the time that I'm getting divorced. And so looking to my grandparents and saying, what did they do well? What did they not do well? Like, how did they feel? So that letter that's read in the beginning by Tom Hanks, where he says, "I'm desperate at times. I have smelled no perfumes." It's a beautiful letter from Waitstill and Martha, desperately asking her to come back home and be his partner again. I felt the same way. And I remember actually cutting that film that day and crying about the perfume when my wife had left, and just going around the bathroom and just spraying perfume everywhere. You know, I just wanted to smell her again. So, you know, that's a very human thing, to share this hero's desperation, and feel suicidal and feel like I'm losing everything I love because the woman of my life is leaving me. And, you know, there are all kinds of reasons why divorce happens. We're not trying to get into the soap opera nature of the divorce, but really to show the humanity of, you know, that they did great things and they also suffered. And
the human cost of activism, which is still real, and which privileged people always can choose to walk towards or walk away from, and other people don't have choice in it. And so, yeah, that issue of who that you raised, of who you think of as us, you know, when you think about who we are, what that means, determines so much how much we decide to bear, as those of us with choice about it. So it's a really inspiring story. We're going to have, I know, Latifah Woodhouse on next week, who's been over in Greece helping Syrian refugees, and I know that, and Afghani refugees. I want to give a nod out to the Salt Spring Island UU congregation, which has taken in a CLF member from Syria by way of Turkey, who is now with his kids resettled in Canada, which is a little better than the US about letting people through, although they're having their own fights up there as well. How do you see congregations getting involved in this refugee crisis, which is the number 56 million is such a huge number. I don't even know what to do with it. I can't even, like, what city is that size? That is an enormous percentage of the world population.
It is, and it's not good for American security. It's not good for European security. This is a disaster for everything America tries so hard to do, and it shows you that no matter how isolationist you become, you really can't protect your borders, because borders are just fantasies. They're just, you know, the place where you come in and out. You know, people can infiltrate your borders without being there, by, you know, all kinds of attacks. So I think we have to change what it means to think about America today, and to think about these refugees not only as a problem, but as an opportunity for the world. You know, the Marshall Plan after the end of World War II not only helped to rebuild our enemies into our partners, it saved millions of people from starvation. You know, World War II was a terrible period, but after World War II in Europe was the worst period, because literally there's no food. So, like the Sharps, the first thing you need to do is provide humanitarian aid, which is short-term in nature. You have to help people be fed and help people have homes or places to stay. And then long-term, you really need to have a plan that has a long-term peace in the Middle East. And I think it's going to take a Marshall Plan. I think it's going to take the Russians and the Saudi Arabians and everyone to realize, and the Israelis, that they have to come up with a new plan post World War I, really, for how these countries are organized, and to really allow for the new phenomena of democracy, which are these sects of Islam, to be able to coexist together without killing each other. And there's no magic plan, you know. You go back to even stories like Lawrence of Arabia, and you see that these struggles have been going on for thousands of years, but they didn't have, you know, the possibility of a nuclear bomb at their disposal. And that, I think, is the greatest worry, is that you have, you know, a possibility of a terrorist nuclear strike in this region. I mean, that would be beyond disaster. I mean, that would be worse. So I think there's so many security constraints. I mean, I can't imagine what it's like to be a humanist at the CIA, worried about all these people. I think there are people in our intelligence services who care about people. I just met one at the White House, a woman named Avril Haines, who worked at the CIA for many years, and now is very focused on this refugee crisis. She's an amazing spokesperson for our government. You know, Samantha Powers is also put her neck out for refugees and refugee resettlement. And as I said, next Tuesday, the date of our film coming out on PBS, President Obama will be actually using our film at his meeting with the heads of state to talk about refugee resettlement. So that's the most exciting thing to me as a filmmaker, is that our Unitarian story of these two individuals will now be part of the president's marketing of his attempt to humanize the refugee crisis. And my hope is that so many people watch this film that they make that direct connection. And that's the work we can do at congregational levels, the UUA level. You know, the UUA has sponsored this We Defy campaign, which is congregational based. And also Needville Lombard, as you said, has created a beautiful interfaith curriculum that can be used not just between Unitarians and other churches, but between other churches and other communities, Catholics and Jews and Muslims, to really be able to not just watch this film, but have a conversation after watching the film that shows people how unified we really are as human beings, rather than always look at different or other. So that's my dream.
Well, I absolutely love seeing the passion that you have for Unitarian Universalism. When you talked earlier about, you know, more people, we need to be telling our story, I was thinking, okay, I'm going to put this on a loop and just put it up at my church and just have it going all the time.
Yes.
What difference has it, but for you personally, what has it meant in your life?
Well, I think it's made me the person I am, where not only am I a filmmaker and telling a story about this, which is not only about my grandparents, of course, it's about the larger struggle for justice in the world today. It's really I have taken on my grandparents' story as part of my ministry of tolerance, of love, of bringing people together. All the things we've been doing is not just to promote the film, but actually to promote the interfaith dialogue that we want. So really the film becomes almost an excuse to get Unitarians and Jews and Catholics together. It's a win-win. It's one of these things where the real passion of the film and the reason why so many people are interested is that all of us are ascribing some connection to the story, whatever it might be. It might be the feminism of Martha. It might be the courage of Waitstill to, you know, use his Harvard Business School and law school degrees to money launder. It might be the beautiful stories of these children. But all of them are relevant today because today is manifesting the same problems. And this story can be like Uncle Tom's Cabin, maybe an inspiration to have a dialogue, a national conversation about what does it mean to be a just and loving country today in the wake of 65 million refugees.
I heard that Ken Burns is getting more and more political as he walks around showing this film. I've heard that he's saying more and more activist things. Can you reflect on working with him on this? And
oh, yeah, very much so. Well, Ken Burns is, remember, he went to Hampshire College, so you've got to be an activist just to go there. Hampshire is not just a liberal school, but it requires a kind of an individual passion for your voice, your sense of identity. And Ken, more than anyone else in the history of Hampshire College, embodies that spirit. You know, my grandfather talked in his work about the liberation of the human spirit. That was his work. And that, I think, is also what Ken Burns is all about. Is he is concerned with telling very personal, intimate stories as a way to tell history. And then he's able to take those individual stories and contextualize them. And we do this beautifully in the film with his editing of the film. You know, Rosemary's not just introduced as Rosemary, as one of these children, she's also describing that the planes are coming over her head in Austria. So you learn two things. You learn about her, you learn about her fear, you learn she was a child at that time, but you also understand that in 1938 the planes were flying over Austria. So this kind of storytelling, this teaching of history, which has become so powerful, is an activist statement on his part. One of the reasons he can't be too much of a political activist, and that the Stanford speech changed a lot of that, is that PBS is a public corporation, and if they appear biased to one side or the other, their funding will get cut off. And it's literally their mandate from Congress is not to appear or even act in any prejudicial way.
When I said political, I didn't mean two-party politics. I meant
but that's part of his constraint.
justice.
His constraint is he's the largest partner, he himself, of PBS products, and if he goes too far to advocate political positions that make PBS uncomfortable, they will then say, the right side of the conversation, or the right, the conservative view will be, that this is, advocating for a political view rather than an objective historical view. So that's the tension he feels. It's kind of a moral commitment he has to be balanced and fair, and not, even though he is a stated Democrat, he doesn't act. But the other thing is, Ken doesn't like to make opinions about things that he doesn't know a lot. He's not involved in the refugee crisis, so even though he might support, a solution, he doesn't want to be arrogant. He doesn't want to speak about things that he is not able to really talk about the specifics, and that's why this White House event was so exciting for him, was to meet the policymakers involved in refugee work. And so, that's the way he works. He works at kind of a key, what we call the key influencer level, and he wants to make a stand on refugees, but also do it in a way that doesn't alienate, half the viewers of PBS. So
right. What I heard that he said that inspired me was, if you're sitting there wondering what would I have done in Nazi Germany, you're asking yourself the wrong question. The right question is, what are you doing now? And when I say political, that's what I mean. I don't mean what party, but
I agree.
That he's about action now.
Yeah, I don't think there's been a film in his career that's quite lended itself so much to that question of now. I think most of the times his films have focused on historical conversations, but all of them, whether it's Jackie Robinson or Jack Johnson, whether it's a discussion of race or there's discussion of feminism, the film about Katie's, of the suffrage movement that he did, or Jefferson, he made, in what my view, a very kind of Unitarian film in the sense of showing that Jefferson was this great writer of the Declaration of Independence, but also that he owned slaves, and that contradiction is a human contradiction, but it was also a blindness. And so that's how he's activist, is to show it through history. And this film, I think, has encouraged him to go way beyond that, in a sense of the parallels are so clear today. What can we do today, and what should we do today? And I think that comes kind of from a mentorship almost from Martha to Ken, that is an important question.
How's the Muslim community?
I think the film, just to finish that thought, I think the film has inspired Ken. I mean, he's not here to say that, but I feel like it has. It's inspired me. It's inspired everyone. Every time I see the film, I've seen the film probably 5,000 times since I started making it, and it's like a prayer. The film is like a prayer, and I see it very much like a pleading prayer at times, like a demanding prayer at times, like an apology prayer. But for me, watching this film, it feels almost like a prayer.
Well, it's certainly a ministry. It's certainly you've created something that's really going to, I think, bring healing. And I'm really excited about Tuesday night when millions of people see this story and, among other things, learn about Unitarian Universalism. And I'm hoping that if they go to our congregations, they will see moral courage, and they will see things that make them think this isn't a historical reality, but a contemporary reality. That's my deepest wish, that people are preparing for visitors, understanding that visitors won't be coming to meditate and just only be peaceful. They'll be coming for support for the kind of courage and morality that they see in the film.
Right.
So that's
I
exciting.
share your prayer. I share your hope. And I think we're doing it. I mean, just yesterday I was told we were over 8 million impressions on social media already without even the film. You know, so if all of you are tweeting and then all of your friends are tweeting and tweeting, and now I understand what this all means. It took me a year to figure out how to even do this tweeting thing. But now I get it, and it's about a conversation, and it's about excitement and getting people jazzed about something. And, you know, what I love about the Generation X that this film has really been made for, but it's made for all of us, is that they care deeply about meaning. And this story is about meaning. And I want to connect these people and the history of Unitarianism. And you look at Florence Nightingale, or you look at, you know, all the great Unitarians that we don't know. We don't celebrate them as Unitarians. We might know that they were great people. But we need, as Unitarians, to tell these Unitarian stories. We need to tell these stories so people understand that Florence Nightingale just didn't wake up and suddenly start helping people. She had a deep-held faith in humanity that allowed her to act the way she did. And without that faith, she wouldn't have been Florence Nightingale.
Artemis, I have a quick question because I noticed you point to your grandmother a lot. Do you think she did, I guess more as a relative term, but do you feel she was much more instrumental and activist than your grandfather?
No, I think they did different roles. I think it was 1 + 1 = 3. I think he did something that allowed her to do what she did. A lot of the logistics of rescuing life and the bureaucracy of life, my grandfather did the work of. For example, there's a part of the story where they deliver 13 tons of powdered milk to starving babies, and they deliver them to the actual midwives who are performing this work of feeding these babies. Without my grandfather, that shipment of milk would never have made it. So he was the one that kind of made the project work, the logistics of it, and the logistics of rescuing people, making sure there was passage on a boat, because if you couldn't get out of Lisbon, you were stuck in a fascist country. You know, the Nazis were going to find you eventually. So, you know, they were continually working. And then when my grandparents came back, they never stopped working. You know, the work never stopped. It was, now they became, in a sense, like the people supporting the Sharps. They were supporting the other Unitarians, like Charles Joy. That's a wonderful person who should be acknowledged as a great doctor and one of the great Unitarian rescuers. He should be honored at Yad Vashem, by the way. Noel Field, who's a very complicated and interesting historical figure, Unitarian also, who rescued lives. You know, so the other piece of this is that there are many other Unitarians that played a role here. Robert Dexter, who brought out Mr. Subeck. She's told her story in a film called Rescue in Flight, and you know, there are more stories that we don't even know about. So part of what my view is, let's celebrate these stories and use them in not just our teaching to other Unitarians, but in our outreach to other people of other faith.
There are more stories, and we're not going to get to tell them all today. It's been a wonderful hour with you, Artemis. So exciting to share your passion, and I imagine many of the clergy preaching on this film, listening to this podcast, getting additional insights for sermons. I certainly hope bloggers are poised to get stuff out immediately so that people get it when they're Googling around, and applaud all of the interfaith work that's going on from so many congregations around refugees and other crises of morality that we're engaged with. Thanks
and you
so
will
much.
love Latifa. You will love Latifa next week. Everyone get excited to meet her.
Yeah, Latifa will be fabulous.
She's rescuing lives today. I mean, she like her husband are like Martha and Waitstill. He's a lot like Waitstill and she's a lot like Martha. So that's very cool to me that this film has inspired that. And next Tuesday,
Joanna,
for those in New York City, I just want to do a shout out. Next Tuesday at New York City, there'll be an event at the Community Church on 33rd Street with Ken Burns to honor the work the president is doing at the UN, and it will be a program of the UUA and the UUSC. So it'll be a very exciting event.
It's really exciting. Joanna, you wanted the last word.
Unitarian Horace Mann said, "Be ashamed to die until you have won some victory for humanity." And it's very clear that your grandparents did that and that you have done that in bringing this story to us. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Take care. Thank you all. Nice to meet you.
Thank you very
Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
See you next time, everyone.